would like now to talk about flipped teaching, what the implications are for teaching practices. And I'd like to focus on 9 key themes, which I think reflect the changes in the approach to teaching if we flip our classrooms. And I'd like to distinguish the flipped teaching approach to the traditional teaching approach that a lot of us are used to. So let's begin by talking about the traditional teaching approach. In the traditional teaching approach, typically the teacher is the sage on the stage. We're meant to be the experts. We're meant to be the font of knowledge, and our job is to try to transmit what we know to the students. And oftentimes, therefore, that involves the element of power. Power is with the teacher. I mean, not just in terms of the assessments, but power in terms of determining how students, for example, should learn, what the role of students should be. In a flipped teaching approach, though, the teacher ceases to be the sage on the stage, the expert, but he actually becomes a guide on the side, a facilitator of learning. Now, this flipped approach to teaching, this philosophy of teaching is important because given that the current technology we have, the easy access of students to the internet, the availability of a lot of open educational resources, it can often be difficult to imagine ourselves really as the sage on the stage, because even as we talk, it is very easy for students to test the accuracy of our statements, to test the reliability of our statements by going to Google. And so therefore, it might be better to, when we actually try to implement a flipped classroom approach, it will be better to imagine our role not as the expert, but kind of guiding the students in their learning journey. And it also means we need to be able to relinquish part of the power as a teacher, because then we give freedom, a lot of freedom to the students, number one, to determine the pace and the timing of their learning. And this is made possible by giving students the opportunity to access a lot of learning resources over the internet or in Moodle. But secondly, it means that in the course of the in-class sessions, you give students freedom to determine what is the best way by which I will immerse in the learning experience. What are the best ways by which I try to engage with the learning content? So another difference, therefore, in terms of looking at flipped teaching is that instead of looking at teaching as a delivery of content, which typically happens in a traditional face-to-face teaching approach, we now look at the role of the teacher as engagement. And this is particularly important both in the creation of educational resources as well as having those in-class sessions. So what we hope to do is that if we create learning resources, for example, we need to make sure that our resources are engaging and stimulating to students. In addition, when we have the in-class sessions, we would like to make sure that the students are actually engaged in the learning activities, because it is something that they want to do. It is something that actually becomes meaningful to them, because what they're doing deepens their understanding of the learning content. What they're doing is something that they can easily associate with and link with their current experiences or their current practices. In addition, having if you look at flipped teaching, it involves more than just talking about coverage of course content. And I think for a lot of us, we often struggle, I'm having this textbook, there is so much to cover. How do I cover 20 chapters in 12 weeks? And especially if there will have to be assessments in the process, or there will have to be other activities that need to be done. That is typically a traditional approach to teaching. But in a flipped teaching approach, your goal is not about covering content. Your goal actually is finding out what exactly are the learning outcomes that I hope my students will achieve. If you focus on those learning outcomes, then to a great extent it doesn't matter what you have covered. Because in the first place, if you think about it, it's quite difficult really for a student to just be sitting down there, listening to you lecture, for them to actually absorb all the information. On the other hand, if you're able to focus on key learning outcomes, what are the key takeaways you hope students will be able to take home? Then you focus on those. That's part of the flipped learning approach. And in a traditional teaching approach, we might say that the teaching environment is quite depersonalized. You know, you have the lecturer here talking to students, or even talking at students. But in the flipped teaching approach, we might say that the teaching is more personalized, because essentially what the teacher is meant to do is to engage with students, to be more engaged in their learning. So he goes around the class, you know, talks individually to students to find out how are they doing in their learning journey. If they have any questions, the teacher should be in a position to answer them. And finally, as far as the flipped teaching is concerned, the key question is no longer how should I teach, but how do students learn? And that is a question that teachers have to ask. What are the best ways by which I can facilitate learning on the part of the students? So there is clearly a student-centered approach to learning in the flipped classroom approach. Whereas if you look at the traditional teaching approach, it's very much teacher-centered. Whereas in the flipped teaching approach, it's always about what are the ways by which I can facilitate learning on the part of my students.